I am Rachel. I have been married to David for nearly 25 years and I am 48 years old. We enjoy a tranquil existence, which is founded on a shared history, routine, and an affection that has evolved over time. I had never given David much attention, despite the fact that he is a senior manager at a reputable firm and frequently shares anecdotes from the office. This changed recently. The genesis of the situation was a casual remark he made during dinner. David said as he sat across from me, "You wouldn't believe the day I had." He then untied his tie. Today, Ethan accomplished an extraordinary feat. The entire office is still discussing it. I raised my eyebrow. Ethan? I had previously encountered his name. A younger man in his early 40s who had joined the company a few years prior, he was one of David's closest associates. David consistently expressed his admiration for him. Smart, ambitious, affable, and well-liked by all. What transpired? Curious, I inquired. David's head shook in astonishment as he leaned back. In the midst of a meeting, he refused to submit to the regional director. Tolton explicitly acknowledged that he was mistaken regarding the new restructuring plan. And the most interesting aspect? He had the data to substantiate his assertion. He nearly averted a catastrophe for the department. I was impressed as I drank my tea. That is audacious. David expressed admiration in his voice, stating that it was more than daring. That was a bold move. No one else ventured to speak up, but Ethan simply declared his intentions. I must admit that my regard for the individual has been further enhanced. David's enthusiastic discussion of Ethan piqued my curiosity, despite the fact that I had never met him in person. I imagined him as an individual who was self-assured, unwavering, and assured. A man who is unafraid to assert his position. And that was the first time in all these years that I actually considered one of David's associates beyond a passing reference in conversation. David and I attended a corporate event, a formal gathering that was held at a luxurious venue in downtown, 1 week later. Although it was not something I eagerly anticipated, I was aware that my attendance was of great significance to him. I wore a deep blue dress that was both elegant and understated. Upon entering the ballroom, I experienced the familiar combination of exhilaration and discomfort that accompanies the presence of so many unfamiliar faces. David introduced me to a few colleagues, and we exchanged pleasantries. Suddenly, I found myself standing in front of Ethan. "Rachel, I would like to introduce you to Ethan." "Ethan, this is my wife," David announced with a smile. Ethan turned to me, and for a brief period I experienced an unexpected sensation. He gazed at me with a subtle, almost magnetic energy. His dark eyes emanated a warmth that was both inviting and disarming. "Rachel, it is a delight to finally meet you," he said with a smooth tone, extending his hand. His voice was composed, steady, and replete with a subdued confidence that heightened my self-awareness. Upon shaking his hand, I was enveloped by the warmth of his palm against my own for a brief moment. And I said, "The pleasure is mine," hoping that my voice would not reveal the sudden realization I was experiencing. I was compelled to participate in conversations that involved Ethan as the evening progressed. He was intelligent without being arrogant, and he was endearing without being overbearing. His attentiveness was the most striking aspect. How he genuinely listened to me when I spoke, and how his responses were genuine rather than courteous small talk. David was briefly separated from me and Ethan during a conversation that took place across the room. He stated with a knowing smile, "You do not appear to be an individual who derives pleasure from these corporate events." Softly, I chuckled. "It is quite evident, is it not?" He agreed. "I understand they can be quite taxing. However, I will acknowledge that David greatly appreciates your presence here. He frequently discusses you." The manner in which he articulated it caused my chest to constrict, not in an uncomfortable manner, but in a manner that caused me to feel observed. "Does he?" I inquired, slightly cocking my head. "Certainly," Ethan stated. "You can tell how much he adores and admires you by the way he speaks about you." Although I should have been flattered, perhaps even moved, there was a deeper meaning to his words that I was unable to identify. A peculiar tension permeated our relationship. It was neither inappropriate nor improper, however, it was undeniably present. I resisted the urge to dwell on the emotion and instead forced a smile before quickly changing the topic. However, I was unable to shake the awareness, the subtle shift in energy whenever we were in close proximity, and the way his eyes seemed to locate me in the room as the night progressed. During the subsequent week, an event occurred that prompted all of those lingering thoughts to emerge. David had overlooked a critical document at home, which was required for a morning meeting. I proposed that I deliver it to his office as I had some spare time. It was not uncommon. I had previously visited his place of employment, however, I had never remained for an extended period. Upon my arrival, the office was hopping with morning activity. I proceeded past conference rooms and cubicles until I reached David's sector. I recognized a voice as I transferred the file to his assistant. "Rachel?" I swiveled and was confronted by Ethan. The abrupt awareness that shift in the air was once again present. In contrast to the previous evening, he was not dressed in a suit. Rather, he wore a pristine white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exuding an air of effortless composure. He said, his expression cordial but tinged with something else. "I didn't anticipate your presence here." I replied I was simply dropping off something for David while endeavoring to maintain a casual tone. He briefly examined me before directing his attention to the coffee dispenser that was situated in close proximity. "Do you have a moment?" I was on the brink of obtaining a cup of coffee. I hesitated. I should have declined. I should have departed with a polite expression. However, I merely bowed in agreement. "Certainly." We entered a more tranquil area of the office where the din of conversations and booming phones receded into the background. Ethan presented me with a cup, and I was aware of his attention as I sipped. After a brief pause, he stated that I had intended to convey the sentiment I had expressed during the event. I gazed upwards, perplexed. "Regarding what?" He stated, "About David's affection for you," and then paused before continuing. "However, I also intended to convey that you do not appear to be someone who has been viewed in the manner in which you deserve to be." The word struck me with a force that I was not anticipating. Should I have been offended? I ought to have terminated it immediately. Nevertheless, my heart pounded in my bosom, as I was acutely aware of his intentions. And that was the instant when everything changed. I stood there for a brief period, the coffee cup warming my palms while his words elicited a distinct form of warmth in me, one that caused my heart to pound. I was uncertain about what to say. My inclination was to dismiss the situation, to feign that I had not comprehended the significance of his words. However, there was an element of honesty and rawness in Ethan's expression that rendered it impossible to disregard. I forced a small chuckle and swallowed hard. "That is an audacious statement." Ethan slightly inclined his head, which caused me to be perplexed. "Is it?" I exhaled slowly. "David and I have been in a relationship for 25 years. It is inevitable that he observes me." He nodded, but his eyes were tinged with a sense of foreboding. "I do not mean in the manner in which a husband perceives his wife without affection or routine. I mean, he genuinely views you as the individual you are today, rather than the woman he married decades ago." His words were akin to a gentle tempest that approached, disrupting the order I had meticulously established. In reality, I was uncertain as to whether or not I had a response. My marriage had been consistent, secure, and comforting for many years. However, Ethan's inquiry caused me to acknowledge how infrequently I considered whether I was still desired, noticed, or profoundly understood, as opposed to simply loved. My pulse quickened as a result of his inquiry, which implied that he had observed it in a manner that I had not yet acknowledged. Eventually, I said, "I should go," my voice more subdued than I had intended. I was not impeded by Ethan. He simply nodded, as if he understood that I needed to depart, but also that I would continue to reflect on this conversation for an extended period of time. Additionally, he was correct. I followed my customary routine that evening, which included preparing dinner, arranging the table, and listening to David discuss his day. However, my mind was haunted by the moment in the office, the manner in which Ethan had gazed at me, and the subtle intensity of his voice. I was compelled to confront the realization that his words had prompted in me, despite the remorse I felt for contemplating it. I was wide awake as I lay in bed beside my spouse that night, staring at the ceiling. David turned toward me, stirring slightly. Half unconscious, he murmured, "You will be made to pay." "Yes," I whispered as I was contemplating. Before drifting back into sleep, he made a small noise of acknowledgement, unaware of the thoughts that were racing through my consciousness. Throughout the subsequent days, I endeavored to postpone the moment with Ethan. However, life, as it frequently does, had other intentions. I opted to visit the cafe near David's office, which is one of my favorite locations to relax and unwind, rather than returning home alone as he had another late-night meeting. In the evenings, the atmosphere was more tranquil, with the gentle murmur of conversations mingling with the aroma of warm pastries and coffee. I had just seated myself in a corner banquette when I detected a voice that was well known to me. "Rachel." I raised my head, feeling a faint sensation of breathlessness. Ethan stood there, holding a takeaway cup, and appeared surprised but delighted to see me. "What are the probabilities?" I replied with a modest smile. He laughed. "Either fate or the harsh reality of working until the wee hours and requiring caffeine." He pointed to the vacant seat across from me. "Would you object to my request to sit?" I hesitated briefly. "Certainly." He sat down and placed his cup on the table. "How have you been?" I absent-mindedly stirred my tea as I shrugged. "Preoccupied." "The customary." Before leaning slightly forward, Ethan observed me for a brief period. "Additionally, how are you truly doing?" The manner in which he posed the question gave me the impression that he was already aware of the answer. And as I spoke, I glanced out the window, releasing a small breath. "I am uncertain. I suppose I have been contemplating." "Regarding what?" Initially, I hesitated, but the words spontaneously emerged. "Regarding the remarks you made in the office." Ethan did not appear astonished. In fact, it appeared as though he had anticipated my statement. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I spoke it aloud. "I am uncertain as to whether I have been genuinely observed in a considerable amount of time." The words hung between us, weighty and genuine. Ethan's demeanor ameliorated. "Rachel, that is not a matter that you should have to contemplate." I felt a lump in my esophagus as I swallowed. "It is not that David does not love me," I hastily clarified. "I am aware that he does. We have established a family, a life, and cherished memories. However, I believe that I became more of a fixture in his universe rather than someone he truly observes at some point." Ethan did not respond in a hurry. Rather, he waited for the words to settle before speaking. He compassionately stated, "I believe that is a common occurrence for many individuals. However, this does not obligate you to embrace it." My heart was thumping as I gazed downward at my hands. I should not be engaging in this conversation. I should not be experiencing this emotion. However, I succeeded. I forced a small smile as I took a deep inhale. "Ethan, you pose numerous hazardous inquiries." There was a seriousness in his gaze, despite the fact that he smiled. "I am of the opinion that they are not hazardous. I believe they are essential." I looked at the time and came to the realization that it had become quite late. I should leave. Ethan agreed, but he refrained from immediately taking action. He merely observed me, as if he were attempting to discern a message from my demeanor. He ultimately said, "Rachel, take care." I nodded, retrieved my satchel, and emerged into the darkness. However, I was aware that something had changed as I drove home, my hands firmly grasping the steering wheel. Ethan had articulated a sentiment that I had yet to acknowledge. And now that it was in the open, I was uncertain whether I could continue to disregard it. The night air was chilly against my skin as I drove home, but I felt warm and almost feverish inside. My thoughts were entangled in emotions that I was not yet prepared to identify, causing them to spiral. I convinced myself that Ethan was merely a kind man, a friend, and a colleague who had asked the appropriate questions at the appropriate moment. However, I was aware that this was not the complete truth. The manner in which he gazed at me was peculiar. The manner in which he listened, which was genuinely attentive, was uncommon. It caused me to reflect on the length of time it had been since I had experienced that level of attention, and I was unable to stop thinking about it. I resolved to behave in a manner that was consistent with my usual behavior at the office the following day, and to leave the events of the previous evening behind me. I was only able to endure 20 minutes as my stomach tightened as soon as I sighted Ethan by the break room, with his sleeves pulled up and a cup of coffee in his hand. He was not engaging in any unusual activities, he was merely conversing with another colleague. However, my body responded before my mind could prompt me to remain rational. He raised his head, catching my attention, and there it was once more. His gaze was characterized by a quiet intensity and a silent query. I quickly turned my attention away and hastened to my desk, hoping that my pulse would slow down. I required distancing. However, later that afternoon, I found myself walking toward his office with a file in hand, a pretext, a justification for conversing with him. He glanced up from his computer when I gently knocked. "Reasonable?" His voice was genial and almost expectant. I hesitated, my hand grasping the file slightly too tightly. "I have the reports you required." He tugged at his lips with a slow smile as if he could see straight through me. "Please enter." I entered the building and secured the door behind me. The only sound between us was the faint hum of the city outside the window, as the office was silent. Ethan observed me as he reclined in his chair. "Is that truly the reason you arrived?" I opened my mouth to respond affirmatively, but the words failed to emerge. Rather, I exhaled and sank into the chair that was situated across from him. I acknowledged that I am uncertain as to my purpose in being present. The expression on his face was inscrutable as he briefly examined me. "I believe you do." The air between us was dense with unspoken words. My pulse was palpable in my larynx, a steady drumbeat in opposition to the silence. I finally murmured, "I am unaware of the nature of this." Ethan leaned slightly forward. "It is not required to be anything, at least not if you do not wish it to be." Nevertheless, it had already occurred. The manner in which I felt in his presence, the manner in which my pulse raced, and the manner in which my thoughts persisted after I had departed his company. It was a thing that frightened me. "Ethan, I am married." His gaze never departed mine as he nodded. "I am aware." Shaking, I exhaled. "If this is the case, why does it feel as though I am on the brink of crossing a line?" Ethan maintained his silence for an extended period. Subsequently, he stated perhaps it was necessary to identify the line prior to its crossing. I forced myself to breathe forcefully. "What is the significance of this?" He leaned forward and placed his forearms on his desk. "It implies that this may not be about me. Perhaps it is a matter of you finally recognizing what has been absent." His words resonated profoundly with me. Why? Because he was correct. This was not about Ethan. It was about me. I had lived my life without pondering or experiencing the emotions I am currently experiencing for an extended period of time. I had experienced solace. However, it was not equivalent to fulfillment. Presently, I was incapable of obscuring it. I abruptly arose. I should leave. Ethan did not attempt to impede my progress. His expression was completely inscrutable, and he simply nodded. "Rachel, please be well." My heart was thumping as I turned and exited his office. However, I was aware that the moment was not yet complete as I departed. A process had been initiated. There was no turning back. The weight of what had transpired, or rather, what had nearly transpired, enveloped me like a dense shroud. I dedicated the remainder of the afternoon to evading Ethan, devoting myself to my work, responding to emails with excessive enthusiasm, and participating in informal conversations that bore me. I will do anything to silence the frantic thoughts that are constantly circling in my mind. However, the unspoken truth is that it does not remain mute for an extended period. I was emotionally and physically fatigued in a manner that I had not experienced in years by the time I drove home. My sternum was burdened by the weight of realization. There was more to my inquiry than simply pondering my marriage. I was contemplating my own actions. I was seated across from Mark at the supper table that evening. The only sound emanating from the room was the gentle clinking of flatware against our plates. For the first time in a long time, I felt as though I was seated across from a stranger, despite the fact that we had lived in this house for 20 years and shared thousands of meals. I hesitated, my fingers clenching around my fork as Mark scarcely lifted his head from his plate. "Lamady." "Answer, yes. Who are you?" He shook his head. "Same as usual." Although it was a seemingly innocent phrase, it had a profound impact on me at that precise instant. Simply because I came to the realization that our marriage had devolved into the status quo. Conversations that never penetrated the depths to touch anything genuine. A predictable rhythm of days blending into evenings. I placed my utensil on the ground. "Mark." He finally glanced up. I exhaled slowly. "Are you content?" He exhibited a faint frown. "What do you mean?" "I am inquiring as to whether you are content. Are you in agreement with us? With this existence?" Mark blinks, evidently taken aback. "From where does this originate?" I replied, "I am uncertain. I feel like we've ceased to see each other." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I believed he was going to dismiss the query, as he frequently did. However, his expression gradually softened. "I suppose I believed that this was the outcome after a certain point," he said quietly. "You become at ease." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You construct an existence. You cease to pursue something new because you believe you have already discovered it. And do you believe that is sufficient?" Mark maintained his silence for an extended period. Then he exhaled and rubbed his face with his hand. "Rachel, are you attempting to convey a message to me?" I hesitated. This was my opportunity to be completely transparent. I would talk to him about Ethan, about how I had experienced a level of acceptance that I had not experienced in years, and about how, for the first time in a long time, I had begun to doubt the nature of our relationship. However, I refrained from doing so, as the focus of the situation was not Ethan, but rather us. I grasped Mark's hand, savoring the comforting sensation of his skin against mine. "I am determined to prevent us from slipping into a stale routine. I am apprehensive about the possibility of waking up one day and discovering that we have been cohabitating instead of living together." I did not. It was not a grand declaration. His fingers tightened around mine. It was not an ideal resolution, however, it was a start. For the first time in a long time, I felt as though we had made a stride toward regaining our footing. I passed by Ethan's office the following morning at work. Our eyes briefly met, and I did not pause this time. I simply smiled at him with a slight, knowing grin and continued to walk, as I now understood that this was never about him. It was about me. For the first time in years, I was finally prepared to begin the process of determining my true identity. The story's just beginning. There are more broken hearts and dark secrets ahead. Hit like, subscribe, and keep exploring with Love Missteps.